I woke to the sharp, mechanical beeping that slices straight through sleep, the kind of sound that doesn't ask permission before dragging you back into consciousness. For a second, I lay still, staring at the ceiling as my heart adjusted to the idea that it was no longer dreaming. The automatic blinds in my apartment began to rise on their preset schedule, and a thin blade of early dawn cut across the hardwood floor of my living room. 5 a.m. That alarm only activates when someone tries to force access or insists on entering without authorization. I pushed myself upright in bed, my hands automatically finding the wheels of my chair. My lower back protested, the familiar reminder of the accident that changed everything about my life. 12 floors below me, the Charles River was still wrapped in that quiet gray-blue light that exists only before the city fully wakes up. My apartment in Riverview Lofts had always been my refuge, the one place where I could breathe without bracing myself for impact. But at that hour, even sanctuary feels fragile. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. I answered, already alert. "Ms. Hartman," the voice said. It was Trent from building security. I'd never heard him sound like this before. Tight, careful, almost nervous. "I need to let you know, your sister and her husband are downstairs in the lobby." I said nothing, letting him continue. "They arrived with a moving truck," he added. "They're insisting they own your apartment. They're asking that you come down immediately and vacate the unit because they're taking possession today." For a few seconds, I just listened. There's a strange quality to hearing your life described as if it has already ended, as if the conclusion has been agreed upon without you in the room. I could almost picture it. Lydia standing stiffly, Bronson calm and confident, papers in hand, telling a story that sounded official enough to scare people into compliance. "Okay," I said finally. My own voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. "That's fine." There was a pause on the other end. "You want us to escort them out?" Trent asked. "No," I said. "Let them sign in. Make sure their names go in the visitor log. I want everything documented." I ended the call before he could ask another question. I rolled into the kitchen and reached for the mug I'd left on the counter the night before. The coffee was cold and bitter, but that first sip grounded me in a way nothing else could. Outside, the river was calm. The boats tethered to the marina, rocking gently, completely indifferent to the fact that my sister had decided to take my home before sunrise. I opened the building's security app and pulled up the live lobby feed. There they were. Lydia stood with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, shoulders slightly hunched, as if bracing against something invisible. She looked smaller than I remembered. Next to her, Bronson Reeves stood perfectly composed, one hand holding a thick folder, the other tapping it lightly against his leg. Not nervous tapping, confident tapping, the kind that says everything is already decided. Behind them, two movers in navy jackets leaned against a bright white truck, half awake, half uncertain. They kept glancing between Bronson and the security desk, waiting for someone to tell them whether this was a normal job or a mistake they'd regret later. Watching them from 12 floors above, I felt something unexpected settle over me. This wasn't spontaneous. This was rehearsed. Bronson leaned toward Lydia and placed a hand on her elbow. To anyone else, it would have looked reassuring. I knew better. That touch wasn't comfort. It was control. His eyes flicked toward the elevators, then back to the folder in his hand, like a man waiting for the final step in a plan he'd already run through 100 times. He thought this was his victory lap. I took another sip of cold coffee and let the bitterness linger. There was something almost poetic about watching them stand in my building, under my chandelier, preparing to erase me from a life I had rebuilt piece by piece. I had learned how to live again in that apartment, how to manage pain, how to breathe through anxiety, how to accept help without surrendering control. I had cried on that balcony. I had laughed there too. That space had held me together when nothing else could. And now they believed they could take it with a moving truck and a story. I set the mug down and rolled closer to the window as the sun rose higher, turning the water gold. Before the accident, I made my living noticing what other people missed. I worked in financial investigations, the kind that doesn't come with flashing lights or dramatic arrests. It lived in spreadsheets, quiet interviews, timelines that didn't quite add up. Fraud never announces itself. It arrives disguised as concern, as reasonable suggestions repeated just often enough to feel harmless. You learn to watch patterns instead of people, to trust the shape of behavior more than words. That training stayed with me long after the crash. The night it happened, I was driving home later than usual. Rain slicked the highway, turning headlights into long, white streaks that blurred together. A truck in the next lane drifted just enough to clip my rear tire. I remember the sound before the impact fully registered, the sudden weightlessness, then metal screaming as the car spun. When I woke up, everything below my waist felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. Doctors explained it carefully, the way they do when they know the sentence will change a life. Spinal damage, permanent injury, months of surgery and rehab, followed by a quiet conclusion they never said out loud: I would not walk again. The accident took my legs, but it didn't touch the part of me that noticed inconsistencies, or the part that knew when something didn't belong. There are nights when my body still betrays me. I wake up with my heart racing, convinced for a split second that I'm back inside that spinning car, rain pounding the windshield, headlights rushing toward me from impossible angles. The mornings after are harder. My muscles ache from holding tension too long. My hands feel slower. My patience wears thin. But even then, my mind is sharp. I notice tone, timing, the way questions are framed. Trauma dulls the body, not the instinct. I learned responsibility early. My parents died in a highway accident when I was still young, and overnight, I became the adult in the house. Lydia was just a kid then. I paid the bills, cooked the meals, helped with homework, and learned how to swallow my own fear so she wouldn't have to carry it. I learned how to stay calm when things fell apart, because panic never helped anyone. That history mattered later, more than I realized at the time. It's why, when Lydia told me about Bronson Reeves, I wanted to believe the best. She spoke about him like he was stability made human. Calm, organized, someone who understood paperwork and rules and the kinds of things that intimidated her. She said he made her feel safe. After everything we'd been through, I wanted that for her. When she brought him to my apartment for the first time, he arrived exactly on time, holding a small box of pastries and wearing a smile that felt rehearsed but effective. "Thank you for letting me visit," he said, setting the box down neatly. "You have a beautiful place." His voice was warm, measured, the kind people trust without thinking about it. As Lydia talked about work, Bronson asked me questions. How was rehab going? Was the building comfortable for me? Did I ever feel overwhelmed living alone? Nothing he asked crossed a line. Still, I noticed where his eyes went when he thought no one was watching. Not to the river. Not to the light on the water. To the file cabinet near my desk. To the framed article on my bookshelf about the accident and the settlement. It felt less like curiosity and more like inventory. I told myself I was being paranoid. Old habits cling, especially when you've spent years assuming the worst to stay alive. Then the comments started. One morning at the cafe downstairs, May slid my coffee across the counter and hesitated before letting go. "You sleeping okay, honey?" she asked gently. "Your sister mentioned you've been having rough nights." I looked up. "Did she?" May nodded. "She just worries about you." That afternoon, a neighbor I barely spoke to asked if everything was all right in my unit, because someone thought they'd heard my door open late one night. I knew that wasn't true. I'm meticulous about locks. Trauma does that to you. When I asked Lydia about it later, she brushed it off with a soft laugh. "I might have mentioned you've been stressed," she said. "People just care." A week later, we were sitting at my dining table when she cleared her throat and said, "Have you ever thought about letting someone help manage things? Just to take the pressure off?" "Manage what?" I asked. "Your finances," she said quickly. "Your investments, the apartment. You've been through so much. You don't have to do everything alone." The words were hers, but the phrasing wasn't. I studied her face. "Do you think I can't handle my own life?" Her cheeks flushed. "No, of course not. It's just, Bronson says situations like yours can get complicated. He works with legal documents all the time. He knows how these things go." There it was. Quiet, polite, planted. That night, I lay awake listening to the city settle outside my windows, replaying every conversation. None of it was openly hostile. That was the danger. Concern wrapped around implication. Care laced with doubt. The story forming around me was subtle but effective. A woman alone, disabled, traumatized. Someone who might need oversight for her own good. I had seen this tactic before, just dressed differently. Bronson wasn't rushing. He was shaping perception, using Lydia's love for me as leverage, using my injury as justification. He wasn't trying to take anything yet. He was preparing the ground so that when he did, it would look reasonable. That was the moment I stopped hoping I was wrong. I didn't confront him. I didn't warn Lydia. I didn't argue. I started watching. Because when someone is building a case against you, the most dangerous thing you can do is let them believe you don't see it coming. I didn't confront Bronson. I didn't ask Lydia questions that would tip anyone off. I went quiet in the way investigators do when they stop talking and start listening. I installed the cameras myself. Small, discrete units tucked into corners most people never look at, positioned to capture entry points, and the file cabinet near my desk. They recorded continuously and uploaded to a private cloud account with redundant backups. I named the folders by date and time, the way I always had. Order brings clarity when everything else tries to blur. 3 days later, the footage gave me what I feared and expected. I was at physical therapy when my phone vibrated with an alert. Motion detected. I waited until I was back in my apartment before opening the clip, forcing myself not to jump to conclusions. The door opened without resistance. Bronson stepped inside with the casual confidence of someone who believed he belonged there. He moved slowly, deliberately, touching nothing at first, as if testing the room for witnesses. He went straight to the file cabinet. He didn't take anything. He didn't rush. He flipped through folders, checked labels, photographed documents with his phone, and closed the drawer exactly the way he found it. Before he left, he stood still for a moment, scanning the room like a man memorizing a map. That told me everything. He wasn't stealing. He was surveying. I asked Lydia later, carefully, whether she had ever given Bronson a spare key. She hesitated, then nodded. "Just once," she said. "He said it was in case of an emergency." I didn't argue. I thanked her and let the silence do the work. Trust doesn't shatter loudly. It fractures in thin, almost invisible lines. The next step was handwriting. Lydia had brought me documents weeks earlier, forms she said Bronson suggested we prepare just in case. They looked legitimate at first glance. Clean formatting, reasonable language, the kind of paperwork people sign because it feels responsible. I scanned copies and sent them to Dorian Hale, an old colleague who specialized in handwriting analysis. He called me the next morning. "Whoever signed these studied your signature," he said without preamble. "They're good, very good, but they're not you." "How can you tell?" I asked. "Pressure and angle," he replied. "You hesitate on downstrokes. This person didn't, and the slant is off by a few degrees, enough to be intentional." "Forgery?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "and not amateur." That night, a padded envelope arrived at my door. No return address. Inside was a letterhead bearing my last name and 3 words printed boldly across the top. Hartman Family Trust, LLC. My hands went cold. It was a legal entity, registered out of state, structured to look like asset management. Someone had already laid the foundation, waiting to funnel my property into something that sounded protective and responsible. The language was careful, almost kind, framed as stewardship rather than control. I sat at my desk and stared at the letter until the room felt too quiet. Bronson wasn't improvising. He was building a pathway, step by step, key by key, signature by signature. He was turning access into authority, concern into consent, and family into leverage. I replayed the footage again, watching the moment he lifted his phone to photograph my files. The angle, the steadiness of his hand, the certainty in his posture. That was when my fear finally gave way to focus. I created a timeline, camera entries, document exchanges, conversations, dates, phrases. I backed everything up twice. Then I waited. Because when someone believes they're moving unseen, they always move faster. And the fastest mistakes are the ones that leave the clearest trail. I wasn't going to stop him yet. I was going to let him show me exactly how far he intended to go. I met Maribel Stone on a gray morning in Boston, the kind that makes the city feel sharper and more honest. Her office sat on the 9th floor of a narrow brick building near the courthouse, all glass and clean lines, nothing decorative enough to distract from why people came to see her. She listened without interrupting while I laid out the timeline, the footage, the documents, the spare key, the forged signatures. When I finished, she folded her hands and took a long breath, like someone confirming what they already knew. "He's positioning for guardianship," she said calmly. "Not immediately, gradually, He'll claim diminished capacity, push for limited authority first, then expand it. The LLC is the holding pen. Once assets are inside, control becomes a paperwork exercise. I asked her if my injury made me vulnerable in the eyes of the court. "It makes you targeted," she replied. "There's a difference." She explained how these cases are framed, how concern is weaponized, how disability becomes a narrative instead of a fact. I listened, absorbing every word, and felt something settle into place. This wasn't chaos, it was strategy, which meant it could be countered. We built the shield that afternoon. Maribel drafted a special needs asset protection trust designed to lock my property and accounts into a structure the court would recognize and respect. I retained full authority. Every decision still required my consent, but anyone attempting to interfere would leave fingerprints all over the legal record. We filed immediately, requested court sealing, and registered the changes before the sun dipped below the skyline. When she slid the final documents across the desk, she met my eyes. "This protects you," she said, "but protection alone won't expose him." "I know," I replied. "I need him to cross a line." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Then you let him think he's winning." I did exactly that. I told the concierge I'd be visiting a friend out of town. I updated the resident app. I left my lights off and my calendar empty. I packed a small bag, rolled out the front door, then returned hours later through the service entrance, using the same quiet pathways staff used after hours. I positioned myself in my bedroom, monitors open, cameras live, watching my own home like an operations room. The waiting was the hardest part. On the third day, the door opened. Bronson stepped inside without hesitation, keys in hand, posture relaxed, like someone coming home after work. He walked the living room, lifted his phone, and began taking photos. He spoke aloud, not to anyone in the room, but to the version of himself who already believed this was done. "She won't see a dime," he said casually. "This place is mine now. All it takes is a few signatures." I stayed still. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "People like her never understand how this works." I watched his reflection move across the screen, every word time-stamped, every step documented. He wasn't stealing, he was claiming. And that distinction mattered. He pocketed his phone and stood in the center of the room, breathing in deeply, like a man enjoying his reward. Then he left, locking the door behind him. I didn't follow. I didn't confront him. I sat there until my hands stopped shaking and my breathing evened out. Because the line had been crossed. He had entered my home without consent. He had documented my property. He had declared ownership aloud. And he had done it believing no one was watching. I shut down the monitors and rolled back into the light, my apartment unchanged, my resolve sharper than ever. The trap was set. All that was left was timing. I barely slept that night. My body rested, but my mind stayed alert, running through contingencies, replaying footage, checking timestamps one last time. When the alarm sounded at exactly 5 a.m., I was already awake. The lobby camera showed the moving truck easing into place outside Riverview Lofts. Lydia stepped out first, shoulders tight, eyes scanning the glass doors. Bronson followed, confident as ever, a folder tucked under his arm. Two movers waited behind them, shifting their weight, unsure. I called Trent and told him to follow procedure. Sign in, visitor log, nothing skipped. Paper remembers what people try to forget. They came up together. Bronson unlocked my door in front of security as if it were routine, as if ownership were a matter of posture. The movers rolled their carts forward. One of them reached toward the bookshelf. That was when the police arrived. A patrol car pulled up outside, lights off, presence unmistakable. The officers entered calmly, not with urgency, but with the patience of people who know the truth reveals itself when you slow things down. The female officer took the papers first. She read without expression, asked for the notary number, then compared it against her screen. "This unit," she said evenly, "is held in a court-sealed special needs trust as of yesterday afternoon." Bronson's smile flickered. He leaned in, lowering his voice, changing tactics. He talked about trauma, confusion, concern. He said I was overwhelmed, that family was just trying to help. He spoke as if I weren't in the room. I rolled out from the bedroom and into the light. "I am the owner," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I did not sell this apartment. I did not authorize a transfer. I did not hire movers." I handed the officer the folder I had prepared. Camera stills with timestamps, the handwriting report, the forged documents, the letterhead for the fake trust, the court order for the real one. Each page landed with quiet finality. The officer nodded and turned back to Bronson. "You entered this residence without consent," she said. "You presented falsified documents. You attempted to remove property." Lydia looked at him then. Really looked. "Is any of this true?" she asked. "Do you even love me, or am I just part of this?" He opened his mouth and closed it again. Nothing came out. The handcuffs clicked softly, almost politely. The mover stepped back. The hallway filled with silence and the low hum of the elevator. After they took him away, Lydia stayed where she was, eyes fixed on the floor. I waited until she looked up. "You weren't stupid," I said quietly. "You were trusted." She nodded, tears spilling over, and whispered that she was sorry. I believed her. When the door finally closed, my apartment felt different. Not because anything had moved, but because the threat had. I rolled to the window as the sun climbed higher, casting light across the river. For the first time in weeks, my shoulders relaxed. Justice didn't arrive with shouting or revenge. It arrived with preparation, patience, and a record that told the truth without needing my voice. I stayed there a long time, listening to the city wake up, knowing that boundaries are not cruelty. They are survival. The apartment went quiet after Bronson was taken away. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the heavy kind that settles after something breaks and finally stops moving. Lydia stood in the middle of the living room as if she had woken from a long, disorienting dream. Her eyes moved slowly, taking in the furniture, the shelves, the space she had walked into, believing a story that wasn't real. Then her knees gave out. She knelt beside my wheelchair and began to cry, not softly, not carefully, but with the kind of sobs that come when denial finally collapses. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I didn't see it. I swear I didn't see it." I didn't pull away. I wrapped my arms around her and let her cry against me until her breathing slowed. When she finally looked up, her face swollen and raw, I spoke quietly, because this wasn't a moment for anger. "Manipulators don't need their victims to be stupid," I said. "They only need them to love someone and to have a weakness they can touch. He used your trust as a weapon. That's on him, not you." She nodded, shaking, and for the first time since all of this began, I saw relief break through the guilt. Not forgiveness yet. Just relief that the truth was finally out in the open. The days that followed were procedural and exhausting. The police collected footage from my cameras and from the building. Trent gave his statement. The movers confirmed who hired them and what they were told. Investigators traced the fake notarizations and the emails used to register the shell entity. Everything Bronson thought was invisible turned out to be meticulously documented. The charges were serious: forgery, fraud, attempted grand theft, abuse of a dependent adult. Each word carried weight, not just legally, but morally. Lydia filed for divorce without drama or delay. She found a small apartment nearby and began the slow work of rebuilding trust, with me and with herself. I didn't celebrate, I didn't feel victorious. What I felt was steadiness. In the weeks that followed, something in me shifted. I realized how close I had come to losing not just my home, but my autonomy, my voice, my sense of safety. And I realized how many others never get the warning signs in time. So I did something I hadn't planned. I began hosting small community talks. Nothing formal, just conversations about red flags in finances, about how control often hides behind concern, about how disability, grief, or family loyalty can be twisted into leverage. People came quietly at first, then more openly, women, caregivers, even a few men who admitted they had ignored similar signs. I didn't tell my story for sympathy. I told it for clarity. Because justice doesn't always look like shouting or revenge. Sometimes it looks like silence, timing, and a signature placed on the right document before someone realizes they've already lost. Calm isn't weakness. Preparation isn't paranoia. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They are survival. If you've listened to this story from beginning to end, I want to know what you think. Did it resonate with you? Would you like me to share more stories like this? And if so, what themes should I explore next? And if this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe so you can hear more voices, more stories, and more moments where women choose themselves without apology.